Hey bosses, it's Marie from Asian Boss. Most of us have probably experienced working or studying from home at some point during this long pandemic. But can you imagine being an international student that's stuck in your home country because the country you were supposed to study in completely blocked you from traveling in? This is the reality for hundreds of thousands international students who are still currently enrolled in Japanese and Chinese universities, but are unable to re-enter the countries due to the heavy travel restrictions. A lot of you guys asked us to give these students a voice, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. We invited two guests to speak up, one who was supposed to study in China and the other in Japan. Let's hear what they have to say. Hey Rachita and Paris, thank you for joining us today. For starters, could you both please introduce yourselves?
So, hello everyone. My name is Rachita Kurmi and I'm from India. My current major is medicine and surgery, Bachelor's of Medicine and Surgery, and I'm doing it from Shandong University, Chilu College of Medicine, Jinan, China.
My name is Paris. I'm from Canada, and right now I'm in Singapore. I study at ICU, International Christian University in Tokyo, Japan, and I'm doing a master's in language education, and I'm 1 year into this 2-year program.
And could you both tell us why you decided to do this interview? Like, why is it so important to talk about the China and Japan travel ban?
I think that many people know that there are problems right now that the international students are facing due to the student visa ban, but not everyone are exactly aware about what's the current scenario and how difficult it is for us. So I really think that people should know about it, and this interview might help to make our situation more aware to people, and somehow we might get even a reply back from the embassies. That's what I'm hoping for.
In my case, trying to enter Japan and knowing students trying to enter China, I mean, we're far beyond kind of the beginning period of uncertainty and not being 100% confident on how we can tackle day-to-day life. But I think at this point, we have strategies that are effective that we can implement to resuming life. And in the case of China and Japan, for example, where they're being extremely resistant to allowing that to occur, to happen, in spite of what methods we have. I think it's really important to call attention to that because I don't think that they're very self-motivated to correct that behavior, and I think there does need to be at least some sort of resistance internationally or some sort of awareness, like Rachita was mentioning, brought to this issue, so that the hundreds of thousands at this point students waiting to enter these countries can resume their lives.
But many might not even be aware of what exactly has been happening. So maybe if you could summarize in your own words what's exactly been happening and when and why China and Japan have been closing their borders to international students or even foreigners in general.
I came back on 12 January 2020 back to India. I was for my holidays for about a month, and it has been 2 years and 16 days that I have not been able to go back. It's not like I'm counting, but yes, it has been more than that. The main situation why China closed its borders, it was very clear because of the pandemic. And it was a correct decision because there are so many international students and it's a very big risk to open the borders so soon. So yes, for these 2 years, even after the vaccinations, the China has not opened up yet because they want the safety of the international students. We want answers, and not just that we will be thinking about it. We are coming up with amendments. We are done with those answers. We need a date. We need a deadline now.
So Paris, when did Japan close its borders and why?
As far as I'm aware, Japan closed their borders in sometime in the summer, in the middle of 2020. And then briefly they reopened October to December of that year, of 2020. And then again, they shut the borders. And for almost all of 2021, except a 3-week period in which almost no students could enter because of a very complicated application process that was not given enough time to fully be developed and acted upon. Essentially, they were closed for all of 2021, and they are still closed. And their new reason for being closed, again, for closing after being open for just 3 weeks in November, is because of Omicron, and they're highly concerned about it. But I think that what really kind of encapsulates the whole attitude towards Japan's response has been to isolate themselves from the outside world and then kind of wipe their hands with everything and say, okay, we did everything we could. Because internally, there's not a whole lot of very strict COVID policy. And is it true that people wear masks? Of course, like there are restrictions in place and there are social customs that people follow, but there's a huge contradiction between their external policy and their internal policy. And I think that a lot would like to point to COVID as sort of like an outside virus, an outside force that we can control through our immigration policy, through our borders. But realistically speaking, I mean, if you look at the numbers right now this past week, they've had a huge increase in cases. And I think it's fair to say that you can't exactly control, even through strict border policy, the spread of something like Omicron. And that's coming after almost, a year and a half at least of the borders being closed. So I don't really understand the scientific reasoning behind it, because, you still have this, huge spread, developing recently in spite of these policies. But I mean, I think to sum up, like the basic attitude they've had towards it is we're closing the borders, we're shutting ourselves off, and we're going to hope that that is what does the trick.
How many international students are currently affected by these travel bans? Like, how big is this problem?
So there are about 500,000 international students who were studying in China and are currently being affected by the student visa ban. And around 23,000 students are Indian students who are currently facing the problems.
Okay, and what about Japan?
Recently, they put out a number, this is in the beginning of December, that said over 150,000 students are waiting to enter the country. And I assume that this is higher now because there's been a new intake of students for the spring, and assuming that, international students are among those, I could see the number being closer to 170 or 180, if not more. And I know that all told, including workers, trainees, and other folks waiting to enter Japan for, long-term reasons, waiting to have their visas processed and administered, that is well over 300,000 people at this point.
Let's talk a little bit about your personal story regarding this. Why did you initially decide to study in China and Japan specifically? Like, what was so attractive about studying abroad in those countries?
Okay, so talking about China, it's one of the most developed countries in the world. And the medical facilities and the teaching curriculum was very much similar to India. And since I was not being able to get an admission here, I preferred China. And the best part about it was that the research. I found that Shandong University was one of the best when it was in terms of research and development. And Chilu Hospital, that's one of the teaching hospitals of Shandong University, was something my parents liked the most about Shandong University. So they were completely agreeing to the fact that Rachita should go and study in this university. So it was very much personally my parents' decisions that they were completely satisfied with the teachers, with the professors, and the office staff, and the way the labs were set up. It was way much better than some of the universities that they had visited in America. So that's why we thought that China is the best one.
So originally in 2019, as I was ending my undergrad, I went and presented at a student conference at the school that I now go to. And while I was there, I got to meet instructors and fellow students, and I found that the research they were doing was interesting and relevant to my own interests, and so I decided to apply. And thankfully, my application was accepted, and I was enrolled by the fall of 2020, but I did defer initially until spring of last year, thinking by that point I could actually be there in person to start. But seeing as that wasn't the case, I decided to start online, and you have to get on with your life at some point. But essentially I was there for similar reasons, for academic purposes. And I think that China and Japan alike are very privileged in that they can attract great minds from all over the world who want to attend their institutions and use their facilities and contribute long-term to the future of these countries.
Did you have a personal interest in Japan? Did you also like the culture? Was that also part of the reason you wanted to study there?
My bachelor's is in linguistics, and I'm interested in language and language research. My own research for my thesis is, uh, well, it has implications in Japanese, as in that's a language that I'm looking at for my research and conducting interviews in and whatnot. So it's also very relevant there. And then culturally speaking, of course, I'd been to Japan, and it was a very attractive place to me. You know, it's a safe country, it's beautiful, it has a lot going for it. I know I'd be very comfortable there. So absolutely, that was a factor.
So when were you supposed to study in Japan? And were you already in China and Japan when they um, shut down the borders to enter? Or did they just kick you out of the country, or how did that work?
No, I was not in China when the borders were starting to be closed, and I was not kicked out of my university. I had come to India for holidays, like on 12 Jan, and somewhere around 18th or 19th January, we got the news that we are not going back this semester. We thought that it might be just for a month or so, and then we got the news that the student visas are going to be banned, and like there's this big pandemic coming up in China, and that's why we are not going to go back any soon.
So if you already moved to China for 6 months and already lived there, that means you have your clothes there, right? So what happened to your belongings, to your personal stuff?
So our belongings are still in our rooms, and they are being sanitized every once in a while. But yeah, most of the students, what happened was that since we were not aware about this, we didn't take all our belongings. So many people left behind their things which they thought that they don't need for this 1 month. So some of them even left their laptop behind. So that was a big issue when it came to like we have to study online now. Without a laptop, it's very hard. Some of them even left their documents behind, thinking that it's just 1 month. Why do we need all of them? But it creates a problem now, because now they need those official documents and they don't have it, because like for transfer, like to transfer to another university, they need those documents to submit to the other university, but they don't have it anymore. So that creates a problem. And about clothes and everything, no, they are still safe over there. We don't have to worry about it. And even our dorm fees was like waived for this entire pandemic, but we are still paying our tuition fees.
For the duration of my degree, as long as I've been enrolled in classes, they've been online. And so that has been, I'm halfway through my third term. And once this term is finished, that'll be half of my degree essentially. I was there in 2019, but I wasn't enrolled at that point. Essentially, I came back, got my acceptance letter, and then shortly thereafter, they were closed. So since then, I've been waiting essentially.
So you haven't even been studying in the country, so you've been outside from the beginning.
Yes, that's correct. If you think about, a typical 4-year degree, and you consider the fact that we're coming up on 2 years of Japan and China being closed respectively, I mean, you've gone through half of the total population of international students in the country who've graduated in that time, and you need to replace them, right? So half of that population waiting to enter the country, all studying from abroad, and term after term, that simply increases with every new batch of international students waiting to enter. It's a huge amount of people, and for some of us, like myself, we've been waiting over a year. Some of us who were unfortunate enough to just barely, not be able to enter the country, trying to get in and then having the door shut in our face.
So for you personally, what are the biggest obstacles you are facing as a student who's stranded outside of the country of your university?
I remember that we had started on WeChat and DingTalk, like for just the next semester after our winter break, we started on WeChat and DingTalk. Lectures were being conducted, like we could record it on DingTalk, and like we could communicate with the university professors and everything on WeChat. Like we had made groups and everything. But there was suddenly a ban of more than 200 Chinese apps in India, which caused a very big problem for all the Indian students. So that was a complete loss of communication with our Chinese universities. There is also the fees. Fees is actually a very big problem for students of Iran, the Iranian students. They were not allowed to completely set up a smooth bank account in China. I remember students paying their fees, their tuition fees in hard cash because it was much easier for them than a bank transfer. So that's what they did. And now that we are facing a pandemic and where online transfers was the only option, Iran faced a big problem. They could not pay their fees on time. And eventually, like every other university, even the Chinese universities were pressuring the students to pay the fees on time, or they won't be allowed to sit for exams, won't get the transcripts, and won't be eligible for the scholarships. So losing our precious years and all the hands-on experience in labs, hospital rounds, internships took a huge toll on the students' mind and physical health. Depression, self-doubt is just the start. Even one of the Afghanistan students asked me to tell this, that as we all know, like Afghanistan was facing a very big problem right now, past 1 year. So for them, the network ban and the internet connection problems is always a very big issue. And if online teaching is all that we are going to do, then internet is one of your biggest assets. If you don't have internet connection, then how will you study? So for Afghanistan, for Iran, even for India, but I think Afghanistan and Iran face a bigger problem than India in this case.
But that's out of your control, right? That's like not, you can't control that.
Can't control it. But then the question arises, you can take a transfer, but transfer is not easy because you need the transcripts, and if you have not paid your fees on time, so that getting transcripts is a bit dicey. And second, the financial conditions. Not everyone is so financially well off that they can just go to US or like any other big American university or any other university for that fact. And language, another language. Who is interested to learn another language after spending so much of time learning Chinese? Even that's an issue. Yeah, like you can study back in your own country, but that's again starting from zero. And after 2 years of online education, no one is ready to start back from zero with all that competitiveness already around in your country.
So, Paris, what are the most difficult parts for you to be studying online?
So for me, what that looked like for the first two and a half terms was I was back in Canada in Vancouver, and there's a 17-hour time difference depending on whether we were in daylight savings or not. And that meant, like, my first term, for example, I had class until 3 in the morning. So I would get up, I mean, by force, I would need to get up, at noon or like early afternoon so that I wasn't too tired by 3 a.m. when my class was ending, so I could like pay attention. But effectively, I couldn't live a normal life, right? Because if you're waking up at like 2 in the afternoon and you're starting class at 5 p.m. and then you're in class until 3 in the morning, I mean, what time do you have to see other people? Even if it's just like, I mean, we're in a pandemic, right? So we're not, going out and partying every night. But if, even just seeing the other people who you live with, if that's your parents or your roommates or whatnot, when do you eat your meals? When do you prepare your meals? When do you do laundry so that you're not disturbing people in the middle of the night? I mean, all of these are just kind of like micro factors, but they build up, especially over time. So I had been living like that for at least 8 months for the beginning of my degree before I moved here to Singapore, which is a lot more reasonable considering it's just an hour time difference. But it's incredibly frustrating to be in that situation, especially to be in the situation where you don't know when it's going to end. You could be on the precipice of entering the country and you should be ready to go at all times, but no one's telling you anything. No one's giving you a long-term plan. And like Rachita said, like another difficulty is having already invested so much time, even if you started online in this pandemic, this has gone on for 2 years so far. You don't want to give up at this point because you've been holding on to the idea that, I'll be there, next month, the month after that, whatever, I'll be there soon. And you've already invested like time into classes, time and effort, money, of course, into tuition. Another factor that need to be mentioned is that scholarships, people's scholarships are also in jeopardy. People's access to financial support, because if you look at something like the JASO scholarship, which is one kind of institution that awards many scholarships in Japan. I mean, those kind need folks to have set up bank accounts in Japan already, which can only be done in person. I mean, anyone who's trying to subsist off of that kind of scholarship, which needs a Japanese bank account, I mean, if they haven't been able to enter the country throughout the course of their degree, they're not going to be able to. And that's the case for me. That was one of the scholarships I received, or in theory received, but wasn't able to collect. I think people throw around the term transfer in schools like it's easy somehow. It's quite difficult, and it requires a ton of effort and a lot of time. Like, I even looked into it myself after 2 terms. They essentially told me is you could maybe transfer credits for a couple classes, but essentially you'd be starting from zero. And because of the admissions process, even if you were to apply now in the spring, you wouldn't be starting until, depending on the school, it could be the fall or it could be 2023. So there's all these difficulties that kind of work together to wear down at you. And the longer it goes on, the worse, obviously, your mental and physical state is. Like, those are factors that I'm sure every student waiting to enter Japan, and equally China and other places, is experiencing right now. And this isn't unique to me, but those trying to conduct research or trying to take classes like Ruchita is taking, ones that require hands-on experience, or working with others collaboratively in person where that's necessary. I'm a year into a 2-year degree, and the research that I do requires having very complicated recording setups and interviews with participants in my own research, and I can't do that from a distance. So I don't know what I'm going to do. How am I going to collect my data? There's a very limited amount of things that you can do online research-wise. So I totally understand why people are finding it impossible to continue at this particular moment. The number of international students leaving schools in Japan and China, I think, will only continue to increase unless they have a concrete timeline that they can show they will stick to. I think it's inevitable.
On the last thing that you mentioned, that there has to be like a certain date that has to be just set, and people, like the policy makers, just have to stick to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But just to play the devil's advocate a little bit, in the end, even the policymakers, they can't predict the future, right? So even if they say, okay, we might open the borders again, in the end, they have no control over the number of cases that are going up. For example, in Japan right now, we're hitting at like over 62,000 cases, and that's probably not something they were able to predict back in November when they opened it for like 3 weeks, right? So what do you say to that?
I would say to this is there are known effective ways that you can facilitate the entry of students into your country safely, and I think by and large Japan has ignored that fact. And if you look at other countries, especially in Europe, if you look at Canada, and even in the United States, I mean, there is a great amount of evidence that this can be done. Students can enter the country and you can do so safely, and it doesn't need to disrupt your prevailing pandemic-related measures. So if you adopted the policy, I mean, generally speaking, the policy that, yes, we're going to reopen to students, you can devise ways to do so both effectively, efficiently, and safely. But that is a will that you need to have first and foremost. And if your populace is very much against that, and I think there's evidence to say that that is the case in Japan, considering the immigration ban is widely popular in the country, then that's never going to happen. So you need to adopt the stance that, okay, now is the time we're going to open. We're going to figure out an efficient and effective way of doing this safely. And then you need to stick to that policy. I mean, abstractly speaking policy. Yes, you may need to slightly adjust, maybe the number of students coming in per day, or kind of the minute details of that, but you need to adopt this policy first and foremost. And I think Japan isn't at that point yet. And even when they opened briefly in November, they were they were tiptoeing around this idea. They weren't sure if they wanted to open, and in the end, they closed back down just as quick as they opened. So I think that is the mindset that needs to be adopted. But I think that it should be mentioned that schools, by and large, for the most part, are doing absolutely everything they can, and I don't think that hatred or disappointment should be directed at them. It should be directed at those who are in charge of enacting these policies.
And even I remember this university being so cooperative. As I told, that there was a ban of apps in Iran, and like it happened suddenly in the middle of the lecture. We were attending a Chinese lecture, and suddenly there was a ban of apps, due to which all the students got disconnected, all the Iranian students got disconnected suddenly. Within a span of like few days, weeks, we worked with the office, all the class representatives came together, and like we came up like which app is can be again we can use it as a basis of communication, like for students who are like in different countries, and as well as it works properly in China, because there are many apps like which work outside of China, and they work very well. For example, Google, but doesn't work very well in China. You can't even access it with a proper VPN. So that's why we were trying to set up something like which works very well in China and people are aware about it, and as well as it works in all the different countries from where the students belong. But like university came up with plans of asking the class representatives to record all the lectures, to save up the data, and like send it to the students personally via email or sharing the link with them. So that's how we worked. So it was like more of a teamwork, and we worked pretty efficiently in that. So I'm glad that our university took all the steps, and like they were like completely instrumental when it came to setting up a new basis of communication.
I think that's a great anecdote to highlight because I think it proves or it illustrates the facts by and large that students and most institutions are working together collaboratively to find solutions to this problem and to administer online teaching that is effective and efficient and whatnot. I mean, there's a lot of times I've entered classes in the last year on the first day, and essentially we're sitting there on Zoom with the teacher, and they're asking like, okay, how can we make this, the best experience possible for you?
Yes, because the universities are not the ones to be blamed. I mean, they are the ones who are helping us. If we start blaming them for everything, then what's going to be happening? It's a pandemic. No one knows what's going to happen next. When the fourth wave or the fifth wave might come, and like something like we need to make out more vaccines or something. We don't know what's going to happen, but still, if there's any chance, because Japan and China are the countries which are very much developed and hold the capacity and the ability to set up all the quarantines and like to bring up the protocols to call the international students back. So I really don't know which other country can do that very much efficiently. When I think about it, it's just Japan and China that comes into my mind.
Actually, what about exams? When you take them online, is that more difficult, or like, is it easier to cheat?
So yes, cheating is also like people find one or the other way to cheat in their exams. So I remember one of the students sending me a video of this Microsoft Forms. The exam was being conducted on Microsoft Forms, and they could easily cheat by putting up some other student's student number and other student name or anything random, and just tick all the questions, because it was an MCQ based questions exam. So just tick any answers, and like if they submit, they can get the answer sheet. Even if they receive 0 out of 10, they don't care, because the student number and the student name mentioned was someone else, or maybe a completely random person. So but they got the answer, so now they know the answers, they write it down somewhere else, and now they again come back and like fill the form like with their student number, with their original name, their Chinese name, and complete the forms. And that's how they gave the exams. But they can receive 100 out of 100 in that exam, but after that, when it comes to submitting other assignments and other homework, that's where they get dicey. So plagiarism, cheating, everything was a part of online exams. And yes, there are loopholes, but and students like us who actually write the answers properly and like who don't want to cheat, it is difficult for us to get a better ranking.
So you're actually helping the university to come up with solutions for students not to cheat, right?
That's better than actually all the students cheating and all the students coming up with rank 1. Imagine what will happen then. Everyone getting 100 and everyone getting rank 1. Who's on the top, who's at the bottom? No one knows about that. We don't want that to happen. We want better doctors. And at this time where we face such a big pandemic, and we know now like how many doctors do we need, we have to come up with solutions that where we can produce better doctors and not just someone who just needs a degree.
Very good answer. Yeah. Paris, do you want to say something regarding cheating?
Sure, I'll just mention one thing. I think that maybe I'm naive in thinking this, but I think that most students want to succeed and be successful based on their own the work that they put in and their merit. And I think that regardless of the modality of teaching, whether it's online or in person, I think if someone's going to cheat, they're going to find a way to cheat regardless. But I think that that is not the case for most students. And although my degree largely does not make use of like a traditional kind of exam. I mean, it's mostly based on research and writing assignments. If I look at just like the language courses I've taken in the past year and a half, I think kind of the silver lining of this whole thing is it's had the effect of like teachers are starting to realize now, well, instead of creating an exam that relies on rote memorization of vocabulary or terms or dates or whatever it is, I mean, they're approaching it with a kind of more innovative solution, like, okay, let's assign a writing assignment or some other way to show your familiarity or your knowledge of this topic or this language or whatever. And I guess that's just like a kind of happy accident of the whole situation.
So, as you know, China and Japan have some of the world's strictest COVID restrictions with their travel ban. But that's actually despite the WHO saying that they shouldn't, like the countries shouldn't be doing that because it's actually not as effective as they would think it is to contain the spread of the virus. So what do you think is the reason Japan and China are still doing it?
I think China is still thinking that if all the international students suddenly come back to like with respect to universities, the number of cases will increase again. They are thinking about our safety as well as the safety of the Chinese people. And it's correct actually to think like that. But now that all the vaccination process and like students have got even their vaccination boosters now. So I think it's high time that universities should open now. Like they should try to come up with application and protocols to at least start the visa process, because even that's going to take a long time for all the students.
I did see that article recently about the WHO calling out Japan, among others, about their strict border measures. And I think that ultimately what it comes down to is that this is kind of a display of Japan's kind of institutionalized the attitude that they take towards these sorts of issues. And you really don't want to, generalize or like put them, or stereotype, but I'm not surprised ultimately. I mean, if you look at Japan's history of isolationism, like this sort of response doesn't really strike me as all that surprising. Of course, it's incredibly tragic and unfortunate, the damage, the toll that it's had on not just foreign international students, but all sorts of people trying to enter the country or trying to do, live their lives or conduct business or whatnot. But it is a kind of perfect illustration of the attitude that at least policymakers in Japan take towards this sort of issue, which is to say, first and foremost, prioritize your people and cut yourself off from what you see as the threat. But I think that what they see as the threat and the ways that they're trying to protect their people are misguided. I think that that's a very noble cause to try and do everything you can to protect your people. And I mean, if you listen to the rhetoric of any leader across the world right now, it's always, put X country first, we're going to protect our people and do everything we can. And I think that that makes perfect sense. But to do so by, I suppose, unintentionally inflicting so much difficulty on foreign residents in your country or foreign students or whoever it may be, I mean, it's misguided. And, as the WHO already mentioned, it's not effective. And so I think it needs to be, these kinds of policies need to seriously be reconsidered.
And what types of long-term effects do you see both countries suffering by continue banning international students or even foreigners in general from coming back in?
If the ban continues further, the students will have no other option but actually to just take transfer. And then that will be a very big, international education, what China boasts about so much, that we have the best international education for our students. We provide the best facilities and everything. What's the use of all of them when all the students are transferring to other universities, if America or somewhere else, or Australia for the matter of fact? So what's the use of that? So it's going to be a very big blowback for China in terms of international education. In my batch, there are almost around 14 Indian students. And in 2021, the batch that recently just started in a university, there's only one Indian student. You can see already the difference, 40 to 1. Like that's a huge number decline. I mean, no one will go for like getting admission in China now.
Yes, I think that's a great point to mention is that Japan, like China, also they've been trying to increase as much as possible the amount of international students entering their country, coming through the system, to ultimately support or contribute to the country in the long term. They already are at a loss of medical workers. I mean, they don't have enough to support the elderly population as it is, on top of this pandemic. Think about how long it takes to really integrate yourself into a new culture, like if you're coming from India to China, or if you're coming from Canada to Japan or whatnot. I mean, to learn the language, to graduate from an institution there, to find a job there. I mean, these things take years of planning and thought and action, and to kind of bring down a wall on people's lives like this and cut them off and either force them to wait it out, which some will do, or force them to transfer to a different school or find some other path in life. I mean, we will see the effects of that soon if we haven't already.
So, in the end, what does the international student community want to achieve? What are their demands, and how are they trying to achieve that?
So, talking about China, international students, what do we want from China? So, first of all, we need proper news about when borders will be opening, and like how the protocol will be held for all the quarantine, and what kind of vaccination, and if we need to take any boosters, we should know about it from now. And all these international communities who is working for students to return back and is like a mediator between the embassies. They have tried and like making notices and like proposing statements to the embassies, like talking about how much students are dedicated to return back to China and like complete their education, and are ready to follow all kinds of quarantine protocols, and ready to take all kinds of vaccination for it. So I think international students community is actually trying to get into touch with them, and they are trying their very best.
Ultimately, the demands are similar to what Rachita mentioned, which is to say we want visas to be processed as soon as possible, and we want to have a timeline, like a realistic timeline. We want to know in advance what it is that we need to be prepared for to enter the country. I know for a fact that all students waiting to enter the country right now, whatever the requirements may be, they're going to be ready and willing to take action right away to do whatever it is they can to continue their lives. So if that means quarantine for 2 weeks, or if that means getting a booster or whatever it is, what we ask is that we be made aware of this as soon as possible so we can prepare in advance. Educationisnottourism.com is perhaps the largest so far, documenting, at least through signatures, just the gravity of the situation, the number of students who would like to see a change in policy made as soon as possible. So I recommend that people go and inform themselves through those resources and sign that if they can. Yeah.
On that note, Rachita, do you have any tips for other international students who are still currently in the limbo and don't know what to expect, how to deal with the situation?
I can give the advice of like, don't face it alone. Talk to others, like, talk to your friends, talk to your classmates, talk to your seniors, your juniors. It helps a lot, because when you share your stories, it helps you to develop a sense of like, I'm not the only one. Thanks to media and journalism, who brought out all the international students of the world and like keeping their problems together. Like, yes, they've shared the same problems. Japan shares the same problems. Korea faces the same problems. India faces the same problems. It helps us to know that we are not the only ones. So first of all, like, battling depression is one of the best things that you need to do. And even if like online education and this 2 years of pandemic has not taught us anything, at least it taught us to be stronger than we used to be. We got a lot more patient and a lot more like developed an understanding of how things work. So yes, definitely we grew stronger out of it.
That's a great way to put it, is developing this resilience is something that we did not expect to do as students, but we were forced to. And maybe you're living at home and maybe your parents come and ask you every week, hey, when are you going to Japan? When are you going to China, right? Is there any news? Something like that. And you might feel alone ultimately, but there's hundreds of thousands of us like out there in the world waiting to resume our lives. So insofar as you can, reach out, and yeah, we're all in this together.
So lastly, is there anything our global community can do to help?
Like if this interview now gets on to like the social media, we want that others should share it with people, and like so that it gets spread, like so that everyone knows about what we are facing through. And like if people all together, not only just international students, but all the others who think that this is an issue and we should like come up with solutions for these students, if people can arise this issue in with other diplomats, and if there's a possibility that we all can unite together and put up a good enough pressure to on those policymakers, or like we can talk about the diplomats sitting in the embassies, if we can create enough pressure, they have to listen to us, and then they will definitely come up with solutions.
Well, thank you guys so much for sharing your stories today. Obviously, you guys been through a lot of things throughout these years. So just, it's difficult to say stay hopeful, but just stay strong and always take care. So thank you so much for today.
Thank you so much for having us over here, because it's a great honor to share our stories with you, but at the same time, it's a very big responsibility, as we are the only ones sitting who are here representing the international students of our respective countries. Like I'm sitting here for China, Paris is sitting here for Japan. So it's a very big responsibility. So, and I hope I have covered almost all the points. And I'll be glad if this interview can actually make a difference on social media.
I think if we could kind of highlight in this interview some of those difficulties we face, and maybe kind of promote I don't know, international cooperation, or contribute to whatever the ultimate solution is to this problem. I mean, I think that is the ultimate goal of this kind of discussion. So thanks for having us, and thank you to Asian Boss for contributing to, the solution ultimately to this issue.